All right, welcome everyone to today's Title Topics webinar. These are ALTA's free presentations that we offer every month on issues important to title professionals. I am Jeremy Yowie, ALTA's Vice President of Communications, and today we've got a great webinar lined up to discuss why core values matter, how they can amplify a company performance, and we'll also share why ALTA created its Our Values initiative and how you can develop your own authentic core values for your company, and then how you can integrate them and live them every day. We also got some attendee participation, so please stay alert for that. Before starting, I just need to touch on a few housekeeping items. A copy of today's presentation was emailed about an hour ago to all registrants. You can also download the PDF from your GoToWebinar window pane. If you didn't get the email, or if you're not logged onto the computer, you can also email me and I can send you a copy after the webinar. And my email is jyohe, J-Y-O-H-E @alta.org. Everyone's lines are muted for today's presentation. If you have any time, if you have any questions, we'll hold some time at the end of the webinar so you can submit them through the questions box. And as an added benefit, today's presentation is being recorded. After it's processed, the recording will be available on ALTA's website at alta.org/title topics. And you'll also get a follow-up email that will have a link to the recording as well. I do need to thank Fidelity National Title Group for sponsoring our Title Topics webinars this year. Their support allows us to continue providing these educational opportunities free of charge. And with that out of the way, let me briefly introduce our speakers. Try and get the slide here to go forward. Here we go. All right, first we have ALTA President Steve Day. Steve is National Agency President for Fidelity National Title Group. Also joining us is ALTA President-elect Cynthia Blair. Cynthia is a founding member of the law firm Blair, Cato, Pickering, Casterline. Next we have Bob Grube. Bob is President and CEO of Alliant National Title Insurance Company. And rounding out our speakers is Eric Snyder. Eric is Managing Attorney for Lakeside Title Company. Thank you all for joining us today. And with that, Steve, I will turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this afternoon's program. One of the strategic priorities for the association is the focus on our values. Our intent as a trade association is to allow our members and our industry to proudly display the professionalism and ethical practices as title professionals. But today's program is more than just who we are now, but also a focus on further development and growth, especially within your own operations. To set the stage for this discussion, I'd like to take a few minutes to discuss why the association focused on the topic of values. Jeremy, if you could advance it. The topic actually goes back several years. We, as a Board of Governors, recognized that we had a reputational issue within the marketplace, both from our regulators, our legislators, and consumer groups. A number of negative articles relative to our industry, mostly because of the ignorance of what we do, how we do it, why it's important, but also some on the question of some practices within the marketplace. So the board at first thought that this was an issue of compliance, and in fact set as a strategic priority years back a focus on a culture of compliance. And we started with having webinars and focusing in that area. But then we talked with members, and we realized that we do have a strong positive culture in our industry, and we needed to promote this moving forward. So the idea was, how do we focus on improving our brand, which is the outward manifestation of this strong culture? So why did we do this? And Jeremy, I don't know, this is coming up funky on my screen. I'm not sure if it's the same, but we should be on the why we did this slide still. The purpose behind it was to highlight the positive aspects of our industry. Mary O'Donnell describes it well, that best practices, talking about a culture of compliance, regulatory review, responses to critical news articles, is really playing defense. And we wanted to be more proactive. We wanted to make sure that we were out there telling our story and being on offense rather than defense. So the thought was to focus on our culture and particularly to identify the core values that drive these positive actions of our industry. We have this opportunity to play offense and proactively tell our story. We also noticed that this couldn't be a directive or edict from ALTA or the board. You couldn't just say, this is where we're going to have direction. Just putting out a statement wouldn't work. It had to be a process where the concept is accepted and adopted by our members. So our goal is to provide our members with the tools to focus on the values of our industry, and in doing this, to further enhance our culture, better defining our brand, and improving our image with our regulators, legislators, and our ultimate customer, the consumer. Jeremy, can you go on to the next slide? Maybe. Is it coming up? So this is one of those technical.
Yeah. Hey, sorry, Steve. This is Jeremy. For some reason, it's paused. I'm trying to get it to stop pausing. So if you just go ahead and proceed, and hopefully I can get it to play.
All right. So what was our goal as an association? And again, the idea was to focus in on our culture and bring it back to the basics, a discussion on values. The focus is that there are key values that drive what we do as an industry, and by being able to identify them, we would be then able to express this focus on culture and have this focus, this major one. So in doing that, we reached out to members of the association and received a number of input as to what did they feel was important within our organization that drives this, within our industry that drives this culture. And as you can imagine, when you laid everything out, it was like a constellation of 30, 40, 50 different items. So we, though, wanted to focus in on the key core values, and in using a guideline for this, really had 5 criteria that we wanted to make sure that we covered. And I would suggest to you, as we later talk about the concept of adopting this within your own organizations, that you think of these 5 criteria items as ones that are very important. Up, just go back one, Jeremy. You're just about there. Go back to the 5, the goal. Thank you. So in looking at defining our values for the industry, there were 5 key areas where we wanted to make sure we focused on. One, that in defining the values, that it be memorable. Values need to be focused and defining the culture. They're not a lengthy mission statement. They're the essence of who we are and what we do. So you want that to clearly be memorable so that they can drive the actions within the organization, or for our case, within the industry. The value needs to be universal. You don't establish values just for one segment of your business. It needs to be applicable across all operations, from the boardroom to the mailroom. The values need to be enduring. You're not creating or focusing on a value just to solve a current problem. It is focusing on what is important, in our case, in coming forward, to lead the industry now, in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years. They have to be truthful. It's just not a statement sitting up on the wall that has really no operational support behind it. It does nothing to just have a plaque that defines what your values are. They have to be true to what your culture is, which can be unique for different operations. And the focus needs to be aspirational. When we looked at and coming up with our values, which we'll discuss further on in the program, was have a statement of values that would inspire our members to highlight and promote the industry. As I discussed, the result is hopefully that we will improve upon our brand identity and improve upon that image in the marketplace. So that was a little bit how we got to the concept of values. Maybe, Bob, if you can take it from here to talk a little bit further on how important values are.
Yeah, so if we move from, thanks, Steve, if we move from the industry level down to an individual organization level, you know, what are our values besides these 5 characteristics that Steve mentioned? Well, they're beliefs or behavioral traits which people in an organization hold very dear. They help guide us in our interaction with others and provide the people within the company a sense of direction. Now, a principle, by contrast, is a universal truth. Some companies, they blend principles and values in their core value statements as part of, but other companies distinguish between them. But here's the thing. Every company has values. They're either allowed to happen by default, or they're identified, defined, practiced, and lived. In either way, by default or design, they become, I guess, what I'd refer to as fence posts for judging our behaviors and our decisions as a company. They define the character of the organization. So as leaders, we have the opportunity to define our values, which defines the future we want to shape. On the next slide, there's an example of all the different things that go into culture and engagement. So in thinking about organizational design, leadership development, there was a study done by Deloitte's Human Capital group, and they published a report. And they say that organizational design, leadership development, and culture are the top 3 priorities of executives. So this is in part due to a need to make organizations, according to them, more agile and customer focused. And according to them, when a company's culture is aligned with its values, it attracts those who feel comfortable with those values in that culture. So they say that this leads to people having higher engagement and motivation. I think of it more as connectedness. Am I connected and supporting the efforts of my colleagues and the company that we represent? What's the result that we're trying to accomplish jointly? Who are we delivering it to? How do I contribute to that? Naturally, the Deloitte report goes on and says that higher engagement translates directly to a better customer experience. I know that at our company, we define core values as those things that are important enough to stand up for. So we want to identify things that are going to guide not just our behaviors, but our mindset. And really, it's a set of expectations that we have for each other, how we work together, the actions we take, the decisions we make. And of course, we don't list all of our values. We list our core values. We cover the ones that we feel are essential to everybody's role in the company. Companies with really effective value systems tend to make them very actionable. You know, it's a verb. You know, we innovate, or we deliberate, or we collaborate, or we're helpful, or, you know, et cetera. Now, as you might suspect, in the next slide, they show some of the results Deloitte does of the study. And as the statistics bear out what we might conclude intuitively, that if my coworkers and I know what we're expected to do together and we're helpful to each other, then not just customers, but everybody has a better experience. Now, it sounds easy, and it is easy once the culture and the values are established. But like any discipline, initially it's kind of awkward, then it gets smoother, then challenges emerge. And those challenges test people's resolve to the values. And if the organization, the people in the organization live and measure against those values in those moments of challenge, those moments and stories become defining for the organization, and they open further a door for people in the organization to actually trust that the core values are real. And like any discipline, as you would imagine, without continual practice, our strength fades. We lose our skill. So Eric's got an interesting question for all of us.
Thank you, Bob. I get the fun part here because we're going to spend the next 5 minutes involving everyone and getting your feedback on some issues. So first of all, Jeremy, you want to explain how this voting works? Well, since Jeremy must be on mute, I'll tell you that we have a statement here saying, has your company developed core values? What we're asking is whether or not you've taken any steps within your company or those who you work for have taken any steps to develop some kind of their own value structure. And if so, click the box says yes. If no, click the box says no. And we started the process if you are in the process of working through it. And we'll give everybody a few minutes to click on those answers, and then Jeremy will be able to give us the results.
Yeah, there we go, Eric. You were right. I was muted. I was trying to get this poll to launch. That was causing the issue of not being able to see the screen. It kept wanting to pause the display. So we got about 2/3 of you that have responded. We'll go ahead and close it and share the results. And it looks like, Eric, about half the people on the call have develop some core values, which means we got, a good bucket of people that have not.
Well, I think that deserves a yes, three hits and a hooray. So it's good that companies are starting to think about that, and I'd like to believe that some of it was inspired by ALTA and the presentations that we've been making over the past couple of years, and the direction that the committee has taken in trying to bring this to everyone's attention. We have the values that we're discussing today, and we've put out there as far as what ALTA has suggested, but they aren't a cut and paste type of value structure. It is something that we allow our members to look at, to utilize, to discuss, and maybe incorporate in their own discussions for their own values. My company, Lakeside, we used it as a path to establish our own personalized search and to articulate the values that applied to our organization and our employees. And everybody's will be and should be different and reflective of that company's personality, because every company does have a personality based on who is management, who are the employees, and what is the structure of the organization. And you really have to focus on who you are and what you are before you can really analyze internally your own value structure and what it should be. Now that you've figured out how the voting system works, and we have the system up and working, it's time to respond to a couple more questions. And before we get into our values, let's take a look and see if you can identify a couple of the companies based only on their established and published sets of values. So Jeremy, here's the first one. And while we are all voting, well, I guess not voting, you're coming up with, oh yes, you are voting. There are 4 choices. Isn't that wonderful? So while you're looking at those, what do they have as number 1, this company? It's deliver wow through service. Service seems to be their number 1 priority. And embracing and driving changes, creating fun and a little weirdness, being adventurous, creative, open-minded, pursuing growth and learning. Those are the top 5. Jeremy, do we have a sufficient number of voters yet?
We're getting there. All right, we're over half. So we're going to go ahead and get it closed here in about 5 seconds. So if you want to hurry up and get it in, we'll close and we'll share the results. And almost 3/4 got Zappos.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. we looked at some of the things that Zappos has said themselves internally, and their CEO said, and I'm going to quote him, "Your culture is your brand. Customer service shouldn't just be a department, it should be the entire company." And that's something that Steve was talking about earlier, the importance of having everyone involved in coming up and creating these values. So the values that Zappos and how Tony, their CEO, was able to transform them into something much more by making company culture and company service the priority. And that's why it is appearing as number one on their list. Zappos actually formalized the definition of his culture into these 10 values, which ranged from the delivering wow all the way through service and being humble. Try to apply that to your company and determine, what are you really doing? Are you just selling title insurance, or are you providing a valuable service to your customers along with other products? Jeremy, let's look at the next one. This one's a little bit tougher, so we'll give you 15 seconds, and here's the timer.
Oh, Eric, that noise is not annoying.
All right, that's 15 seconds.
All right, we'll go ahead and close it. We got almost half in, so we'll go ahead and close and share the results here. And 71% Disney parks.
Wow. Now we should have a secondary question, which is, how many people have heard Steve or Bob or I or Cynthia or anyone else talk about values on behalf of ALTA and heard us mention Disney? Well, obviously people were not surprised that safety was their number one choice. And what it shows is that coming up with your own values often requires thinking outside of the box about what really is important. We just think of ourselves as selling title insurance, clearing titles, providing closing services. That's typically what most companies would describe as being the basis for creating their values. But really thinking beyond that, and really what is important, such as with Disney, having their customers have a safe trip, will allow for the other three things to take place. They're obviously single or double word solutions. So Disney's values have endured, and in part because they're so easy to remember. Employees can use them as a litmus test for excellence, whether they're thinking strategy or whether they're acting on the front lines. So at this point, why don't we go ahead and turn it over to Cynthia, who's going to share with you ALTA's Our Values.
Thanks, Eric. So what are the title industry's values when we think about that? Well, ALTA spent more than a year listening to members to understand the pride that we all take, excuse me, sir, that we all take in our work, which we do every day, helping consumers close real estate transactions and protecting property rights. And when Steve talked earlier about how that process started, it started out a conversation about industry compliance, and we really were looking at the focus initially in that way. And Steve is very humble. I have to give him a tremendous amount of credit for really being the driving force behind this, the task force that was initially tasked with helping to develop these, along with staff and other input, and then, of course, soliciting the input from the ALTA members. So when we say we spent more than a year listening to members, we really did discuss and to try to get to the root of what our members do every day. The conversations that we had with our members were really the foundation of our values, and they really reflect the memorable and aspirational values of the ALTA members. We have to, as a trade association, promote these standards, and we want to look to make them a part of our everyday conversations and discussions in our organizations, our local markets, and across our industry. Now, that's not saying, just as Eric talked about earlier, it's not saying that our values, that we should all say, okay, well, these are our company values. These are our industry values. Our company values should be, they should embody these, but they may also have other things depending on our culture, as we've been talking about throughout the webinar. The Our Values initiative also gives us the opportunity to explain not only what we do, but who we are. And the values are: we lead, we deliver, and we protect. So let's take them in order. We lead. We are the authority in real estate transactions. We innovate for the benefit of our customers. So when you think about this, think about, how do you lead in your own marketplace? Often, when we think about leaders, we immediately associate it with the power to make decisions. That's kind of something that you may think about. Well, who's a leader? You associate it with the power to make decisions or to control the actions of others. But really, if you think back to the best leaders that you have encountered in your work and personal lives, oftentimes the strongest leaders didn't fit this particular definition. You'll notice that strong leaders influence the decisions of others. They don't control, but instead they're going to persuade others to action, and that makes a positive difference. This definitely applies with remote online notary, and I know that this is a hot topic right now. I'm chairing the task force at ALTA on this particular topic. So when we think about remote online notaries, 4 states right now are allowing the use of audio-visual technology to satisfy the personal appearance requirement of a notarial act. A lot of states are currently and are poised to take up this particular topic during the 2018 and then future years legislative sessions. There are many, many points of view on this technology. I talk about it with members on almost a daily basis and hear from members of the task force and other members of ALTA regarding this technology and its role in future real estate closings. Early adopters of the technology see 2 main benefits to it. First is the convenience that online notary provides to customers, especially those overseas or in some remote location. The second benefit supporters cite is the technology's role in streamlining closings, making them more comprehensively digital than ever before. Well, some support the idea, others take a more cautious approach. They may recognize their potential benefits, but the fence sitters sometimes also want to examine all the possible ways that online notary could change the real estate settlement process for the good and for the bad. They want to prevent or at least minimize the potential unintended consequences and the concerns about ensuring the notaries are recognized by the various jurisdictions before these transactions start taking place. They want to ensure that transactions can be insured, which of course is the focus of what we do every day. Whether online notarization becomes a big or a small part of real estate settlements in the next 10 years is anyone's guess. This is where your leadership comes into play. Leadership means that as we seek to innovate in our own industry to benefit our own customers, we use our own expertise in the real estate transaction to make sure that we continue to protect our customers and their property rights. There's a need for smart, wise judgment in this process, and the advice of our leaders is very much appreciated. Next slide, Jeremy. The next value is we deliver. We deliver. Our customers trust us to do the right thing, the right way, before, during, and after the transaction. We sweat the small stuff to assure that the land transfer is accurate, swift, and secure. The backbone of delivering is trust. Delivering is about the end point, not just about the process to get there. We don't care about the logistics of shipping a package, just that our Amazon Prime orders arrive within 2 days. Think about that. I use Amazon. We were talking about Amazon as we were getting ready for the panel today, for the webinar today. I use Amazon on almost a daily basis because I order dog food and all kind of other things from there. And since I have 3 large dogs that consume a huge amount of dog food, I sometimes, even though I subscribe to it, have to extra order. And I count on the fact that that Prime order is going to arrive very quickly so that my dogs don't run out of food. Well, the same is true for our customers' perspective in our own industry. Every day, your customers put their trust in you to ensure that their property rights are protected and to get their deals closed correctly and quickly. Every day, you come through and you deliver. You sweat the small stuff so your customers don't have to. You use your expertise to ensure that the land transfer is accurate, swift, and secure. This is an easy concept in practice, but just make sure you do the right thing the right way so that before, during, and after a deal, you earn your customers' trust. And that's what we all do every single day. The last the last of our values is we protect. We protect the property rights of those we serve. We reduce risk so our customers have peace of mind. Protection might be the easiest of our values to comprehend. It's what we do every single day. It's what we provide to our customers. And peace of mind is about trust. It's not about telling your customers that you don't make mistakes or that they won't get hurt, but rather about convincing your customers that if something happens, you'll be there to help fix it. I don't know about everybody else's end of the month, but mine has been pretty crazy. Not in addition to having a ton of closings, I've got lawyers who are out this week, so I'm having to take on an extra load. Today, I had a closing where a seller had a title issue, and we've been working on the title issue for a number of weeks to get it resolved, and we're almost to the end. The seller came in today to sign her documents. The buyer will complete tomorrow, and we'll finish. But the seller was an elderly lady. This was the only piece of property she'd ever purchased in her life. She now lives at a nursing home. Her daughter brought her to my office, and we spent what should have been maybe 10 minutes talking about things. We really spent about an hour. There were a lot of questions. There were a lot of things that she was concerned about. There was an early occupancy agreement. So we went through all these little pieces of it very carefully. I let them ask any question they had of me. And in the end, when the lady stood up, she gave me the biggest hug and she said, "Thank you so much." And I looked at her and I said, "Don't worry. We're going to take care of this and you're going to be fine." And she left with a big smile on her face. And y'all, that's what we do. And that's how we provide peace of mind. The only way to provide peace of mind is to talk with customers. It's the purpose of our Home Buyer Outreach Program, or HOP. Hopefully everyone has heard about that, which has just recently been updated with new advertisements and messaging, and more on that later. We protect our customers not only by issuing a title insurance policy, but also by educating them about what we do, by treating them fairly, equitably, and ultimately by earning their trust every single day. A company's values are the cornerstone of its culture. And while things such as best practices are what we do, values define a company and are what we are. They set you apart from your competition. They make you unique. They're essential to achieving an organization's goals. Since 1907, ALTA has served as the lighthouse for an industry that provides the most efficient land transfer system in the world, which fuels a strong economy and allows homeowners to build wealth. We're proud to represent businesses that are working to protect property rights and provide peace of mind. If you have already developed your company's core values, that's fantastic. My company is in the process. We've been talking with our employees, and we want to do what Zappos did, which is have their employees essentially tell them what their core values are. And we're going to do the same thing. We've already been having conversations with our employees about how we're going to want them to do that. We're doing some strategic planning right now, and then we plan to have our employees assist us with getting those core values set up. If you haven't developed your company's core values, we encourage you to use this as the basis of what you develop. Now, let me throw to Steve to talk a little bit about why our values are also your values.
Thanks, Cynthia, and great story. And I think that resonates with a lot of us as to why we're in this industry, to be able to best serve the public and be protective. I hope that by now everyone appreciates what the importance of values can be to our industry and how it can touch upon your organization. Jeremy, go ahead and move on to the next slide. Because just to highlight that when we talk about our values, we hope you appreciate the importance of your values. Bob previously talked about the studies that had gone on. We talked about Disney and Zappos and acknowledged how important values have been in driving that organization. But most of our members are small companies, 3, 10, 12, 17 employees. But what we found when we looked at values was that the impact was just as important there. That companies that would focus on their values, that allow them to develop their culture, that really have that outward brand manifestation, were the companies that found it easier to recruit employees. Certainly easier to retain them because they felt fully engaged. Greater sense of satisfaction. And of course, as a complete result of that, better customer service, better performance, better profits for the organization and better success and thriving within their industry. So we're going to spend the rest of the program, highlighting now, we've stressed why values are important, but now about your values. How do you take this concept and move it forward to your organization? So, Bob, I'm going to turn it back over to you to go into a little bit of details.
All right. So if you're in the process of developing your values or you haven't started, this might be helpful. Here's some basic steps. I mean, you could probably figure this out on your own, but hopefully this will be helpful. Depending upon the size of your company or your team, the person in charge of creating or leading the discussion about identifying your values might look different. Values can be driven from the top down or from the bottom up. I think in a lot of companies, it's a little bit of both, because usually owners or founders have some real core values that are important to them, and oftentimes other employees can round out that group. But anyway, it depends on the culture and the size of the organization. It also depends, of course, on the expectations of the people that work for you. As a manager in a larger company, it might be different, but if you have a small team, you might directly involve that team in the creation of values. Maybe you have a different department manager that you want to work with, or you'd like input from your boss. But above all, make sure that the people you involve in the process are on the same page. They should be committed to a few core things. They should be committed to drafting and implementing values that are expectations for everybody in the company. They should be willing to brainstorm and compromise, be willing to agree on a set of values that are foundational to everybody going forward, and willing and able to demonstrate those values themselves moving forward. Next, you can brainstorm what's important to your team. You can organize a meeting, give some advance notice. There's a lot of ways that you can do this, and it, again, depends on the culture and the size of the company. But a couple of meetings can work well with a small group focused and interested in articulating their values. A series of meetings work well with time in between to digest for larger groups or companies maybe with lots of different locations. Scheduling a meeting in advance, asking people to think about this, prepare for it, prepare for a discussion, and to try and identify the most important core values to them individually and the ones they think are most important to the organization. I think most people would find that there is a commonality between very core personal values that are likely to align with your company values. So in the meeting, you can have people identify what values they have, what values you all share, what value the company shows, even if it hasn't identified it, what shows up, and the values that might be missing or might be not emphasized that you feel should be. Obviously, the idea is to let ideas flow freely and to hone in on what's most important for everybody in the company. So then you can go on to the next step and you can consolidate and define the results of that discussion, combine similar ideas to narrow down the list, and then once you have a narrowed list, define each value you come up with on that list. So, for instance, let's say one of those values was, there were several words that people came up with, and it just summarizes as an ownership mentality. Well, then have a discussion about how do you make employees feel like that they can make good decisions on the fly, while they're interacting on the front lines with customers, and they're not going to have constant supervision. So, how do you make employees feel that they can do that? How do you help them understand how to act in the best interest of the company and to define what the best interest of the company is? So in that example, having an ownership mentality as a value will take some further discussion to refine. Next, frame your values according to your team's culture. You may want to frame your values in a way that's relatable or inspiring to your people. Some companies might prefer more formal words. Some Companies might prefer more of a casual style. So some companies might say flexibility or agility, while others might say, hey, we roll with the punches. So figure out in your organization if you prefer them to be simple, clear, easy to remember, if you prefer them to be more slang oriented so that they're easy to grasp, or more formal. A lot of companies like to inject humor into their company values. It's a great place. I mean, well, of course, depending upon the style of the company, it can be a really appropriate place to inject humor. So it depends on the organization and what your people will relate to. After you've gone through all that, evaluate this list of values that you've come up with kind of as a whole. Take time to look at them and seek feedback from others who may not have been on the team. Maybe you have a couple of customers that you know really well because you've worked with them for a long period of time. You might ask them what they see as your organization's value, and you might show them the draft of what you came up with. But really, the idea is to look at that list and decide, do they encompass the most important aspects of what you want for the company, not just today, but in the future? Are they ideas that you're really willing to stand up for, to hold yourself and your people accountable to? And will they guide not just behavior, but will they guide mindset so that the decisions that they guide are good ones? Values work best if they're the ideas that are going to push you and your team forward to the shared result that you want to create. So make sure that you've outlined what really works for you. On the next slide, we put, just understanding that values live. You don't come up with them one day and just they're set in stone. They inform culture. They provide fence posts of our actions within a culture. They need to be timeless, yet refined over time. At our company, we visit ours every year as part of our annual planning process, and we don't adjust them every year, but it seems like about every third year or so, there's some edits that go on to refine them further. So it's not a set it and forget it mechanism. Values which are lived guide the culture in the organization over time, and they're felt throughout the organization, and so it's natural to refine them. Just like anything else that's living, culture and values, they respond to how you treat it. Neglect it, of course it'll wither. Feed it, nurture it, tend to the weeds that crop up, and then it'll grow strong and grow healthy. Eric will share some information with us about building a stronger culture.
Thanks, Bob. Something that really resonated with me a few minutes ago was when Steve said, it's not a plaque on the wall. And that's kind of where we're going with these next 4 slides. We've put together what we were calling the 4 rules. And I'm going to talk about the first couple of them because we have come up with these values now. Your company has had meetings, you've gotten input from your employees, you've come up with ideas, you've crafted language, you've come up with something that everybody feels comfortable with, but it isn't sufficient just to have that phrase, those words, that plaque. You actually have to learn to live it. It's a common expression nowadays that you have to own it. You have to own something. And that really becomes the crux of the next part of this presentation, because once you've developed your values, you have to be sure that you make all of your employees, and not make them, have them want to live those values and put them into everyday practice. So your culture becomes job one. It's possible, not that we encourage an inferior product, but it's actually possible to have an inferior product and still beat your competitors when you have the right culture. We'd like to think that we have both a superior product and we have the right culture, and that's always a winning combination. So being values and culture driven is never a completed task. As Bob just said, it's constantly evolving. You constantly have to look at it. You constantly have to tweak it, come up with language that fits the day, because 5 years from now is different from today, is different from 5 years ago, as far as how we say things and how we view things. It's a mindset that requires teamwork, and it has to have an impact on your customers. You need to have a clear guiding purpose and as much passion and conviction about it as the first time you sat down and discussed it. You need to be able to inspire all of the employees to think and act with clarity toward the business goals and the company values, and to really ensure that you're trusting and empowering the people with whom you work to set up programs and infrastructure to support those goals and values. So you have to actually live them. High performance cultures don't happen organically. They are carefully designed, they're architected, they're built with intention. And it's your intention, your own company's intention, you and your employees' intention, not some other companies, not ALTA's, not Disney's. It's something that is peculiar and particular to you. So rule 1 is make values and culture a priority. Rule 2, talk about it constantly. You need to always be bringing this concept of values up in discussions with fellow employees and with your teams. You have to live and breathe that culture, and you have to take stock of it almost on a daily basis. You have to listen, get feedback, and get a good sense of how people are feeling in your office. These are the same steps that you took when first discussing these with fellow employees and coming up with crafting the statement that you developed. You listened at that time, you have to continue to listen. You have to continue to get feedback and get a good sense of how people are feeling in the office. Pay attention and be present and realize that building an amazing culture is a never-ending and ongoing process. And you need to talk with other people, not just to executives, not just to people in human resources, but to middle management, because they are probably the biggest thing that actually shapes culture, because they have access to both the worker bees and to the management. They have a common ear, and they're able to pass messages back and forth to those who may not feel comfortable or have the ability to speak with each other. It's not about asking, is this a fun place to work? It's about asking, who are the people who need development? What is the temperature of each of those groups? The marketing department could have a totally different subculture than the closing people, or the IT people, or the settlement officers, or the title people. Each subculture needs to have attention. And you need to discover how the goals of each individual directly tie into the performance goals of the organization, and make sure this alignment is recognized and understood by everyone. As I said, there are 4 rules. Those are the first 2, and Cynthia is going to describe the next 2.
Thanks, Eric. So rule 3, train, evaluate, repeat. Every decision, small or large, has an impact on culture. You can't just put culture in an employee handbook and hope it happens. How many of you have been in an organization where that was the case, where values or culture was something discussed, but it really wasn't part of your organization, and it was something it was either in a binder, dusty binder put on a shelf, and no one really lived it, or that it was just something that they discussed, but it wasn't really part of the company's, part of the culture, part of what the company was doing every day. I have been in an organization like that, and if you think back, probably many of you have. One of the best ways to get started with this is to set up an engagement survey for your team. This is the easiest and sort of least threatening way, both for you and your team, to dive into the assessment. How happy do your team members feel about coming to work every day? What things excite them the most? What could improve their overall happiness at work? These are all important considerations for making culture adjustments when those are needed. People in senior leadership and management positions are your culture beacons. If they don't respect and uphold your culture, neither will the rest of your team. Believe me, speaking from experience, What's more, your team is going to adopt whatever values the senior leadership projects, no matter what you want them to have, no matter what the main office wall says. They're going to adopt the values that your senior leadership projects. That's why it's so important to train your leaders and your managers on culture. Train them on it. Talk about it. We've been talking about how you've got to talk about it. You've got to talk about it. Talk about it with them, and make sure that what you come up with is really real. Again, we've said this over and over, but it's not too. It's so important to continue to stress. It's got to be what really is real in your organization. That's why it's so important as the leaders and managers rise through the ranks of your own team, or if they're coming in from outside, that they really are trained on your culture. Don't just throw them into a pen, stick them in front of a computer, and say, "Here you go." You've got to give them. You've got to. I'll tell a quick story. At a previous organization where I was, we had a joke about the word inculcate. There was a person in our leadership who used the word a lot, and it was kind of one of those things where we said, okay, every time he uses the word, somebody drinks, we drink, and it was like a drinking game. So anyway. But I'll use the word inculcate. I hope that was not inappropriate for me to say on this webinar. But I'll say that you've got to inculcate the people into your culture. Really get them to know it and live it and breathe it. When the board went to Zappos in February, when we were at our February board meeting, you really feel the Zappos culture when you go into that organization and walk around. Now, granted, it's a kooky place. It's very, very cool, but you can understand why they do what they do and how they do what they do because it is infused in the entire place. Set a plan for more accountability, team building, training, development, and you should see some changes take root in the subculture within 6 months or so, if you really set a plan for that and you really follow through. Within 12 to 24 months, you should see overall changes in your internal recruiting, your brand, and hopefully your attrition rates. Rule 4 is build values into your hiring. Talking about recruiting, as I just mentioned before, if you build values into your hiring, it will make a big difference. Again, referring back to Zappos, when we went to Zappos, we met with them. They talked a lot about how it works there. They sometimes take, I believe it was 60 to 90 days to fill a position, and it may have been even longer or an average, because they don't look for just somebody who can come and take an order in the computer. They look for somebody who, and not somebody who can just say, oh, sure, I'll live these values, but they've got to be comfortable that person is really, really going to live the values of Zappos before they'll hire them. So can you imagine doing that in your own companies? Can you imagine taking that long? So often we have such an urgent need to fill a position that you almost feel like it's better just to have a warm body than no body. But if you want your culture to be reflective of your company, you've got to build values into your hiring. You got to hire people who are living by the same core values that you want your culture to embody. And you've got to ensure that you, as the leader of your company, or if you are in leadership, or that the leaders of your company are authentically embodying the core values that you're promoting. You need to sit back and take an honest assessment of your onboarding process. How does it communicate your company's value? Does it communicate your values? And if so, how? Does it promote? Does it support them? Where can you improve them? Where can you improve that opportunity to communicate your company's values in your onboarding process? And how will you let new hires know when they're incorporating your values and when they're not, so that you can correct them hopefully early enough on, so that you get a good, engaged employee who understands and lives your values. I love this next quote on this next slide, and we're almost done. This is the end. But it's a great quote from Roy Disney, and it says, "It's not hard to make decisions when you know what your values are." I love this. We've seen this quote quite a few times in ALTA presentations, but it's really timeless. In business and in life, values dictate behavior. They guide people in deciding what's right and wrong, and they help companies achieve their missions and goals. This is so true. When you truly understand your values, your actions will come naturally. Please come see us in Los Angeles at ALTA One to help strengthen and nourish your culture. More information about ALTA One is available at meetings.alta.org/1 or /. I never remember whether that's a backslash or a /. Everybody knows what it is. If you go to the ALTA's website and you go to events, you can find it. But please come see us in LA. It's going to be a fantastic time.
All right. Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you everyone else as well for offering some awesome insight into core values, how companies can go about developing them, implementing, and actually living authentic and real values that encompass who everyone out there, who their companies truly are. As we mentioned earlier, we do have a little bit of time for a Q&A. If you have any questions to pose to any of the panelists, submit them in the questions box. We have a few more minutes. If you're a little shy, don't have any questions right now, feel free to send me an email. I can connect you with the speakers. My email is jyohe@alta.org, jyohe@alta.org. Eric and actually Cynthia, you both mentioned, Cynthia, your law firm's in the process of developing some core values. Eric, your company went through this process last year, I believe. Could you share a little bit, of how the process went for you guys and how you went about getting buy-in from staff?
Sure. We have a number of offices throughout the state, and we actually visited each of those offices to discuss and use what's called the SWOT format, which discusses those things that were successful, things that are opportunities, things that are limitations, and the positives and negatives, and what things the employees were really looking for and what they wanted to see done differently that could improve their lives and improve the ability for them to satisfy our customers. And we got a lot of interesting feedback, which was not all that we expected. There were things that we learned that were not going as smoothly that we thought were smooth. There were things that we thought were not smooth but were smooth. So it was a very useful and insightful opportunity, and it helped us to kind of come up with that development of a values concept. I think, as the other speakers have said, that it's something that is constantly having to be looked at and tweaked, because we often make the mistake of going the easy route and throwing out words like we have to be honest, or we have to be caring, or simple things such as that. But the values really need to go a little bit deeper than that and need to be taken to the next level. And that was something we were able to do with the help of our employees.
All right. Fantastic. Maybe one or two more questions. We are almost at the top of the hour, and one of our values is we appreciate everyone's time and running your companies. If say someone on the call, they really want to, dig into this and develop some core values for their company and really improve their culture. Any advice if they're getting some pushback from their boss, their manager? How would you go about actually doing something like this if you're not getting buy-in from your manager? Anyone here offering some advice on that?
This is Bob. I think that if you're not getting response from above, then go downward and find out what people think are the values that they must associate with the company because of how the company behaves, and talk to some customers or vendors, find out the same thing from them, and then finding out what others think, how they perceive the company, and being able to share that with a manager might open the door for a larger discussion.
All right, good advice, Bob. Perception from your customers, definitely.
And Jeremy, just to again to highlight the point that all of the studies show that incorporation and the willingness to incorporate values can drive success and profitability for the business. So, to continue to stress the point, it is not only good for all of the employees, it's great for the people in charge.
Mm-hmm. And just to wrap up, also
one more quick thing, Jeremy. If I can just say, and I know I've talked about Zappos a good bit, but the board read the CEO's book about their values, and if you read that book and you read how on the precipice that company was, how close on the precipice that company was to failing, and then how well and how strongly it's come back, and it's been because of the implementation of values that the employees really drove, and that they really believe and they really live. That, that to me says it all.
Yeah, they truly believed in what they could provide. And Cynthia, you during your part, you shared some great real life stories of how you lead, protect, and deliver. And we really want to capture that of what everyone on the call provides every single day. So if during this call, you thought of something that you've done or coworkers have done, or if something comes up, please share them with us. Email me your stories. And we'd like to possibly highlight them in our publications. Again, my email, jyowie@alta.org. And we just want to hear from you and help share, the great stories from this industry. With that, that will wrap up today's webinar. If you missed parts of the presentation, or if you think maybe others in the office would benefit from listening, as I mentioned before, a recording of the presentation will be available for replay in the next day or so after it's been edited. Looking ahead, next month we will hold our second compliance webinar of 2018, and we will be discussing digital closings. And as Cynthia mentioned, specifically we'll be talking about remote online notaries. And in June, we will turn back to our free webinars, and we will talk about the continued threat of wire transfer fraud, and more importantly, ways you can protect yourself, including some low-tech solutions. And with that will bring us to the conclusion of today's presentation. Again, I just need to thank Fidelity for sponsoring our Title Topics webinars, and also need to thank our speakers for their thoughts on core values. Take care, everyone.